I'd like to welcome you to the fourth seminar today, and this is entitled Implementing Radical Change to Meet Future Sheep Farming Challenges. And I realise that for a lot of people in the industry, radical change can be something pretty modest, but we'll maybe expand a bit on that. We have three speakers who are going to present from left to right here: Tim White, Peter Williams and Liz Genever. I would ask you after the presentations that you keep questions succinct, and we try and work through this quite briskly. I'm sure you've all had a longish day and we don't want to prolong anything unnecessary, but still we want to get a good discussion around the subject. So the running order, I think, Liz, you're going to kick off?
I'm going to move here. Just get myself settled. Hi everybody, my name's Liz Genever. I'm a beef and sheep independent consultant, so I spend most of my time talking about grass and forage. Most of you are experiencing sort of desert-like conditions, so we're not really talking a huge amount about grass at the moment. It's more to deal with lack of. I have 1 foot in regenerative systems, so do a bit of work with people, a lot of work to be fair on getting livestock into arable systems, and I'm really interested in how you encourage behaviour change on farm. So quite a lot of what I've been doing over my career is trying to help farmers make change on farm. My focus for the next 10 minutes is a bit more the theory of the sort of about change and why and how and what we do. The bit that's important you might not quite see on the slide is we had a grass fire at home last week with all the hot weather, lost about 10 hectares of grass. That is an important thing to remember. So it was the day after a combine fire. It was a brilliant week. We'll come back to that, so just remember the grass fire. Slightly dramatic image, but why do we need radical change, basically, is the question that we're being asked. So we're currently experiencing an unprecedented set of circumstances. So we have rising input costs, feed, fuel. We have a reduction in subsidy coming, lots of unknowns about environment schemes, carbon offsetting, options to offset that loss of subsidy. We have challenging weather conditions in a lot of the UK we spoke about. We have a rise of plant-based diets. We have a cost of living crisis that is going to affect lamb consumption. We have famine, we have war, and we have pestilence. We are in an unprecedented set of circumstances, which is why I've got the 4 horses of the apocalypse. However, as individuals, we cannot control any of them. We can control how we respond to them and whether we engage with them, but we can't control any bits of that. And so part of the idea is that we end up in this catastrophizing way of thinking, that everything we think of ends up in the worst possible case scenario. Ironically, in the last few years, it has sort of actually realised some of those thoughts. But we have been unsettled by the last few years of activity, and part of what the point of this is trying to get us to reset in terms of what is our targets, what are we trying to achieve, and about establishing boundaries and controlling the bits that we can control, and not ignoring the rest and sort of living in your own special world, but really focusing on the bits that are going to influence our business and how we can take things forward. But we also are starting to ask ourselves hard questions, and back to the grass fire at home, is that actually, is our system sustainable? We've had a dry year in 2018 and this year, and actually, is it going to be coming every 3 years? Is it coming every 2 years? So do we have to think very differently about how we farm? So my question to you really, and we might not use these words, but do you as a business have a clear vision of where you want to be in the next 10 years? Hands up if you do. Okay, so for me, a vision is about that forward thinking in terms of what do I want my business to look like. A mission is the how, and alongside that we set up some values. So what are important to us in terms of making what's important to our businesses. There are thousands and hundreds of thousands of books on why these are important and why businesses need these. For me, it's about resetting ourselves and refocusing what we actually want to do as sheep farmers or as business owners. So as speakers, we were given these 3 topics. So animal welfare, climate change and food security. That isn't. They are massive as subjects. So do you mean we can never try and deal with all of them in our own way? But what we can do is actually ask ourselves, what can our business do about them? So from an animal welfare perspective, can I reduce the amount of lambs I'm ringing at lambing to sort of to target that? Can I look at what animals I'm culling in terms of interventions? Can I increase the animals that are taking my time to improve future generations? From a climate change perspective, it is a massive topic, but can I look at how do I increase my organic matter, so to increase my moisture holding capacity? Can I think about the forages I'm growing to help me become more resilient in those systems? Food security, again, massive, and if we thought about all of these too much, we'd be in the corner licking something. Sounds dodgier, but you know what I mean? In terms of rocking is probably a better phrase. But food security for me is actually how can we try and reduce the amount of inputs that we need to buy in, reduce our ability to have to go out to the market and deal with the volatility attached to buying in feed. So it's sort of taking these big ticket items in terms of then boiling them down to what's important for our businesses, our vision, and how does it fit alongside what we want to achieve in the next 5 to 10 years. I'll just talk you through this. This is the Kubler-Ross change curve, and it's slightly overly dramatic image I stole off Google, but I'll talk you through it because you might not be able to read the bits. So we have to think about the bottom curve of this, and this is about how we deal with change, how we deal with transition. So the first thing we tend to experience is shock, going, well, this is not, do you mean surprised at the event, or what are we going to do about it? Denial, we move through. So that's disbelief, looking for evidence that it isn't true. Frustration, so that's an element of recognising these things are different, and we sometimes move into anger through that. We can continue down that curve into depression, and that's low mood, lacking energy, apathy, not being able to feel we can fight what we are experiencing. We then hopefully move out the other end into experiment, so initial engagement with new situation. We then move to decision, learning how to work in the new situation and feeling more positive, and then we move to integration, so how we fit those new decisions into our business. So, and this is a theory, but this is what we tend to experience through quite a lot of all the changes and transitions that we experience. We go through this. It might be that we're in this for about an hour, and we've come out the other side, depending on the degree of change. But my argument is a lot of us, for some of the things we're experiencing at the moment, are in the bottom bit, and we're sort of mooching around in that sort of frustration, depression. I'm not willing any of you to have mental health crises, but it's this lack of energy and lack of ability to want to move on. I've mentioned briefly regenerative, and what I find interesting about that community of people is they tend to be on that upward curve. They tend to be in experimental, they tend to be more positive in their outcome in terms of how they're going to approach what the challenges are. And so I think it's a bit mindset in terms of they've probably come through that curve and are heading the other way. But what is also important with this is a lot of change that's happening on farm is we might have the best idea in the world, but we then have a group of family members generally chirping in. So we have to recognise that each person in that business will be somewhere different on this curve, and that's where some of the communication goes wrong, is because we don't know where other people are on that curve. So it's just something, I just find it quite useful as a visual to sort of think about where you are, and this is for everything you're sort of experiencing in terms of big sort of life, sort of things that are going to you're having to shift your behaviour. So a couple of examples really of and we'll lead on to other farmer examples of how people have changed businesses. Very pertinent at the moment in terms of the guy on this book is Doug Avery. Some of you may have seen him. He did a lecture tour, book tour a couple of years ago, and he wrote a book called The Resilient Farmer. And his story was he farms in the top end of North Island in a very, very dry bit, and he had got to that sort of mental health crisis, and was basically the farm was losing money year after year because there was just basically no grass. He was convinced by a neighbour to go to a talk about lucerne, and through that started to incorporate lucerne into his business, and now has increased the profit per hectare by about 5 times. I'm not saying lucerne is the solution for everybody, but it's his book is quite interesting, this idea that it is about we have to challenge ourselves, we have to have courage, we have to have the capability as well. So it's quite a useful book to read at this point, to sort of listen to the story of what he went through and how he changed it. And now he's having big impacts on other people because of his courage to make decisions and change things on farm. The other one that sneaked in at the corner is Dirt to Soil, which is Gabe Brown. So again, it's the sort of regenerative Bible, and that came from a position of he was in the farm business, was challenged from a profitability perspective. He had 3 failed harvests, and so obviously it was very, very tight in terms of what was happening to that farm, and it was very close to losing that farm. But through those 3 failed harvests, a huge amount of biomass was added into those soils, and actually it started the soil biology going in those soils, and has led him to where he is now in terms of this sort of the god amongst regenerative farmers. So this idea of he was farming dirt, he's now farming soil. So again, I'm not willing any of you to have depression or financial or risk of losing farms, but I suppose the moral of this is it comes from this need to change, comes from generally quite a dramatic change of events perhaps, or fire or whatever it happens to be. It makes us challenge our system, and sort of what are we going to do next. So what do we do in this situation normally is Google things. So this is the range of there's so many sort of mechanisms, guidance, tools, acronyms, the 7 R's of whatever in terms of change management. There's lots of theory about how we can change, but obviously we now need to put it and implement it onto farms. There's quite a lot of support out there in terms of how we can go about that. But in terms of, for me, it starts with challenging ourselves to visit different farms and talk to different people. We do have a tendency to form a sort of tribe of people that tend to start thinking like us and doing similar things. So part of this is stepping out of that and going to talk to different people. I had a question this year, which is, can I grow grass without fertiliser? The obvious answer is yes. We just have to go and visit some organic farmers. So it's going to see people who are doing things, and a lot of the technical knowledge we have exists. What we don't have is the skills or the soft skills to get that implemented onto farm. So an example could be groundswells. You mean it's really set off a massive increase in regenerative farming in the arable world. I'm involved in a baby version of that, which is carbon calling, and again trying to do the same thing. So getting people to listen to other people's stories and challenging themselves of how they can apply it back to farm. It is about an element of epiphany. We see it quite a lot when people go and visit New Zealand and come back and want to move electric fence. But part of that is about being away from your farm, being with different people, and being exposed to different things. So we can create that sort of idea here. We don't necessarily need to get on a plane, but it is, a lot of the time, is getting us away from our farm and away from our sort of the nose to the grindstone type approach. For me, it is about finding a support network, and that isn't necessarily the next door neighbour, but we also need people who challenge us. It's not just about people who agree with us and challenge our visions and see what we want to do, but if you're at home and you want to change and you're constantly being told you can't, you need to find someone that helps you and supports you through some of those decisions. It may not be your closest family, it might be friends, it might be a WhatsApp group, but it is about support network. And for me, it's to challenge yourselves so you don't necessarily do it now, but in terms of maybe by the autumn, be able to describe the vision for your business. So what will it look like in 5 to 10 years? So my example could be, I want my farm to be green by July 2027. So what do I need to do now to make sure we don't have a risk of a grass fire again? We have green crops. Could be that we just need rain or irrigation. But the principle is trying to think of what are the species of grass and forage I need to put in so we don't have to experience something like that again. Thank you.
Very good.
Oh, we go.
Okay, cheers. Okay, Tim.
Well done, Liz. You said all I wanted to say, really. I know. And great minds think alike, probably, as well. Okay, so radical change. Yes, so we were asked to talk about radical change and why And I think the reason that we as an industry need radical change is because we're having the most radical change imposed on us right now. And for a lot of us, that means no more subsidy. And we've known about that in the back of our minds for a long, long time, for 10, 12, 15 years probably. We've seen it coming. The last 2 or 3 years, we've had it written down in black and white. But a lot of people still haven't done anything about it. And this is Liz's point of the Kubler-Ross change curve, where you're down in the depression. So I think there is going to be a lot of fallout in the industry due to a lack of response to this enforced change. So if you've relied on subsidy in the past and you haven't yet figured out how you're going to survive without it, then you're probably going to be one of them casualties. And unless you really put your finger out, then it's too damn late. So there are going to be casualties. That's just part of the world. And that may not sound very nice, but that's just the way it is. So what do I think the future holds? And this is only my perception. I think that the factors that are going to affect our industry and the way we farm are going to be, one of them's going to be welfare and marketing. So this is kind of consumer perception of welfare. Doesn't matter what you think about welfare, it's what about our buyers think about welfare. And mutilation will be part of that. So docking tails and castrating animals is mutilation. It's covered by the Mutilation Act. And if you asked anybody to go and dock their dogs or their cats, they'd have a freak out about it. And the customer is coming around to that way of thinking as well. And it doesn't matter what you think about it and whether you like it or not, you've got to start adapting to your customers' demands. The other thing that I see as a problem in welfare is, and it affects my system, which is a very extensive system, is lamb losses. So typically, and I think I'm fairly average in an outdoor system, I might be scanning at 185%, but I'm only rearing 160, 165%. So I'm losing 10% of lambs at or around birth. Now, a lot of people in the industry will say that's pretty damn good. But if I talk to my customer, if I talk to somebody walking across my farm on a footpath about they're pretty damn horrified about it, that I'm losing 10% of lambs at birth, and it's just something that we put up with. So I think that is something that is going to come and bite us as well, and we've got to do something about it. Another thing I think the future holds is taste and quality of lamb. So we, as a farming industry, have concentrated on producing the most lamb we can for the least amount of money. We want to make a good profit margin. But lamb is expensive. It's the most expensive protein you can get. We're also, we cater to an older demographic. So the oldies that are eating this stuff, they're dying out. And if we get, that includes me, but if we want to encourage a younger market, we've got to give them something that's easier to cook and is and appeals to their tastes a bit more. So we've got to look at better texture, we've got to look at quality, we've got to look at intramuscular fats, we've got to look at cooking ability, we've got to look at different cuts. And another thing that Liz talked about a bit is climate change mitigation. So, and again, this is something that's real, that we see around us. The way it affects us and the way we are asked to react to it is very much governed by public perception. So we are under pressure to reduce methane and carbon outputs. We're under pressure to rewild or green our land, and this is something that is going to be really important. And it is something we can use to our benefit, because lamb is a good natural green product that we can market in that way. Another thing I think it's going to be important is data in marketing, by which I mean that we just lost one of our biggest markets, Europe. We have to go out and we have to find new markets, and we have this mantra, UK standards are the highest. But we've got to prove it. And so we have to have proof of all these things. We have to have proof of what we do at the moment. We have to have benchmarks and where we're going. So we have to be able to show that we're reducing antibiotics. We have to show that we're reducing mutilations. We have to show that we're really good at what we do. It's no longer any good just to say we are the best. The other big thing that I see happening is migration of sheep to arable systems. And this is a big opportunity for young people, and young people is what we need in the business. And I see this a lot. So I'm selling breeding stock to people, and a lot of the people that are calling me up are arable farmers putting sheep into their systems. Closest they've come to looking after an animal is their pet cat or a gerbil when they're a kid, and they haven't got a clue, and they need somebody to do it for them. So the opportunities are there for them. It means moving away from home and going to the other side of the country, but it does mean very often being given a chance to farm a couple of thousand ewes for yourself, mainly as you please, and a chance probably to buy in on a profit share. So it's a good opportunity for them. So they're the kind of things that I think are happening and that we have to do something about. And I was asked to say what I'm going to do about these things, or what I do about these things. So subsidy loss, I never received it, so it doesn't apply to me, luckily. Welfare demands, I'm reducing mutilations by breeding for clean tails and developing systems where I don't have to castrate animals so much. And I'm trying to reduce lamb losses by recording lots of data on lamb survival. So we know how many animals are scanned in utero, we know how many are born live and dead, we know how many are dead at 48 hours, and we know how many are dead at 6 weeks old. So we can then, and there is a large difference between genetic lines, so we can do something about that. Taste, we started to do selection for intramuscular fats, looking for better marbled animals to give a better eating experience. But this isn't something that I'm really doing very much. But there are lots of people doing stuff. There are a lot of people doing work in this area, and I think it's very important, and I think it's something that everybody needs to take into consideration when they are selecting stock to use to produce fat lambs. It's no longer any good just producing 20 kilos. It's got to be 20 kilos of tasty stuff. Climate mitigation's a hard one, but we are breeding efficient sheep with reduced chemical inputs, and we're learning to live with and farm with more public access. And the public access may seem a bit different from climate mitigation, but you know, climate change is largely due to being so many people on the planet, and they all want a bit of freedom. They all want to get out there, and if you want any land payments from them for your greening or whatever it is you want to call the countryside stewardship payments you're getting, you're going to have to allow more access, and you're going to have to get on with them people, and they are your market, so you've got to be nice to them. And the migration of sheep, the data in marketing that's something I think we got to do on a national scale. And an example for me would be the UK Medicine Hub that's just being developed by AHDB, which is a way for us to record as a nation how much antibiotics, for instance, we use and what we use them for. And we can use that as a benchmark to show how much better our systems are than, for instance, some of our competitors, let's say in Spain or the southern European countries where they do use a lot more antibiotics. So it's a marketing tool for us, and I'd encourage everybody to get involved with it if they could. Migration of sheep to arable systems, it's happening. It's happening to me all the time. I'm getting offered as a grazier less land to use that is rough ground, and I'm being asked to graze land that's in arable systems. And I have customers calling me up wanting to buy sheep that want shepherds, and so it's happening. So that's my very positive view of the future.
Very good. Thank you, Tim. Okay, right, Peter, going to give us something different again?
Yeah, something totally different. I worked in the Middle East in the early 90s on a big sheep farm. There's about 30,000 ewes from Australia. They were crossed with an Edgeley, something similar to the Damaras we got now, and all the lambs are taken up to Riyadh, and well, it's a live market up there, and it's a different leaner lamb, leaner meat as well. So that gave me the idea. So go back. So that, you know, there's a big gap then till 2017. I went to a Farming Connect thing, and Farming Connect meeting, and they started talking about Saudi Arabia, and brought the memories back. And then there's a EIP, a European Innovation Project, so did some inquiries on that, and then we put a case together, and another farmer, Bedwyr Jones, and Tricia Sutton, she's a retired vet, we put that together, and then we got a grant of 40,000, so we imported the fat tail sheep from Australia, because we couldn't get them from the Middle East with the health certifications. So we brought 30 embryos in 2019, the end of that, and implanted them in December, and the first lambs were born, the embryos, I think we implanted 15 embryos, and there were 6 live lambs. So these are the first fat tail lambs born. So they 3 males, 3 females, and then we AI'd about 55 ewes then, Welsh cross Texels, and I think we had about 70 odd lambs born. So we've got a gene pool now of the pures, and we killed some of the male. You know, we tested them and getting a market for the crossbeds in a way. Gareth Ward down in Wiltshire, I don't know if you heard him, he's a Michelin star chef, he likes them, and so we're trying to get the top end market in a way, and getting the premium there. So that's one of the ewe lambs, the first pures, 7-8 months old there. I actually got them on the stand on the thing, and that's the fat tail of the pure ones, and that's a carcass of a half-bred. It's it's a different classification completely, and it's the meat's a lot leaner, and everyone that's had it tastes more like beef. We've had what do you call it done? We got a Texel cross and a Damara cross. We took them to the Food Technology Centre, the carcasses, and the melting point of the Damara is a lot lower than the normal lamb. So they reckon that's healthier. So I don't know. Time will tell. But yeah, out to the Damara cross of the first year, there were 75 lambs born, 16 singles and 21 twins, and 3 triplets and 2 quads. Yeah, they're quite heavy lambs, really, born. Average 4.8 kilos. They were much heavier than we thought. And they lambed very easy as well, no problems at all. That's one, she reared the quads. She reared them to 8 weeks. Never seen that happen before. She was a Romney cross ewe, I think. Pure Damara data for the 12 embryos we put in the second year. We had better results. 5 males were born and 4 females. That's one of the first year rams. He was in the first winter, I think. And those are the 5 that were born last year. Well, that picture was taken a few weeks ago. Yeah, so something similar again with the data with the AI again in the second year. We've the ones used there are the first crossbeds. We've crossed them with a Damara then, so we got 3/4, but yeah, mixed results for them at the moment. So time will tell with that. That's a fat tail, the pure one. And that's the carcass again. future embryos taken. We've taken embryos out to the first ewe lambs were born. We've flushed them again in last December. We've had, I think, 16 embryos. We've frozen them, and then I take the rams up to Ian McDougall in Farm Gene every few months and take semen off them and freeze that as a backup, and just building up slowly. With there's one thing we need to do is bring more semen in from Australia to get another bloodline to keep things going. To say that Gareth Ward in Annecy has been very supportive. He's 2 Michelin stars, and he likes them. He likes the hoggies as well. So that's Gareth. You'll pay £500 a meal there for the taster. That's another Michelin star chef on Anglesey. He's started taking them as well. So just thank you for Bedwyr and Tisha and Ian McDougall for Farm Gene who helped us. I think, does that make sense? Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you, Peter. Now, floor is open for questions, and please wait until the microphone reaches you, and then we'll go. So, yes.
I've just been to the States on a fact-finding mission on cattle, and it's quite interesting that over in the States they're very, very interested in marbling. So clearly, when the taste aspect, I think there's been far too much emphasis in this country on confirmation. And my father was a butcher, started butchering at the age of 14, and all through his life he pointed out that you cannot eat confirmation. Confirmation is entirely somebody's subjective opinion. You speak to guys in the industry, we've been constantly obsessed with massive back ends, massive shoulders which they can't sell, and shortening the carcass and shortening the neck and making ourselves problems, which clearly we've got to now look at, because if we wanted to increase productivity and make life easier for ourselves and to get people to actually want to work with sheep in the future and have a life, as well as, people these days, they want to actually have a family and a life as well as looking after sheep. So they want something that's simple. So perhaps...
You have a question?
So what I'm saying is, perhaps we want to go down the line of definitely looking at eating quality. And is there anywhere that properly looks at eating quality? Because we don't seem to do it much in this country. It still doesn't seem to be something we look at.
Right. Liz?
So AHDB have I went on a meat science course with them a couple of years ago, and they're doing some taste work at the moment, texture and shear force work I saw on some.
And there's been quite a lot of work in Wales on it as well.
Okay, so they've been working in Wales, so that's what I know here. I know that internationally, so I know that in Australia there's a lot of interest and a lot of work done on it by some breeders breeding for more intramuscular fat and for lower melting point fats, which are important in the cooking process. And how far they got with it, I don't know, but they're marketing it and they're making good margins on it by marketing it. So there must be a difference. Yes. Yeah.
I suppose it's back to. I suppose that back to Tim's point, the question always is about how we get the information. So, it's one of the most expensive gene phenotypes, to collect. So all the one from rearing the animal, taking it to slaughter, if you've got a range of animals and taking them through to taste panel, is very expensive to do. So it's trying to find a trait that we can identify in a live animal that gives a prediction of meat quality. So there is an element we can ultrasound to look at muscle density, which is a predictor, but it's never going to be as good as a taste panel. But it's very possible. We just haven't done it at scale for the range of breeds we have recently.
And so it's possible. So I've seen it in the beef sector. So I went to, what's his name, Lee Leachman, stabiliser man, and looked around his unit. And he was, what impressed me was, whilst we were there, he got a spreadsheet back of 80 steers that he'd sent in the day before or something. And there was a price next to it, and it looked to me like he was getting tuppence halfpenny. And I said, this doesn't look like you're getting very much. He said, yeah, well, I've just been paid for 30% of it. But in 3 weeks' time, they will have done 2 probes on these animals whilst they're hanging. They will tell me about what intramuscular fats they've got, and they will pay me according to that because of quality. So I'll get paid more. And of course, then he was getting all his data back. Lamb, of course, has got we're storing it for less time, and also it's a smaller carcass, so it's an expensive thing to do that with. But I think you're right; it's got to be done, and it's how deep are your pockets? That's what it comes down to.
And I think it is. Do you mean it's that example of Leachman? It's about a breed society, a breeder, isn't it? Taking that decision.
There's a lot of genetics out there.
No, they've been doing the modelling.
No, but it's still it's.
There's a lot of work out that needs doing, isn't there?
In the States, they've been doing it for 100 years, so they've obviously been well ahead of us in that respect.
Yeah, there's a lot of work.
In beef animals, because they've gone down our native route and then used our genetics. That
There's a lot of work that he's doing on sheep as well.
Indeed.
There's a lot of breeds out there, genetics we don't know about that's in the world. You know, there's a big.
Well, in the States as well, there's like Colorado University. They have a dedicated department to doing nothing but looking at beef quality.
Well,
Which clearly I don't know if we do. I mean, I'm sure there's somewhere in this country we can.
So who do you want to do this?
Well, I'm just saying, could a university not do something?
Okay, so at the moment, so let me put it in perspective. If I need to collect information to get a breeding value for any trait at all, I have to get 2,000 traits as a minimum, 2,000 measurements over 3 generations. Now, if I'm weighing them, I can weigh an animal. That's really cheap. If I do a fecal egg count, that's a tenner a count, so that's 20 grand. All right. Now, if I want to do just one shear force test, I'm talking about 30 quid a sample, but I also want to do melting fat points on everything. I'm probably looking at 200 quid per sample.
It's £4,000 the melting point.
Okay, so look,
It's a lot
so
of money.
what I'm saying is you need £4 or £5 million to start it off, and who's going to benefit from it? It's you and me, so we need to find the money, and you can't look to government to do it. Subsidies have gone. So it's a different game, and I haven't got the money, but and I agree it needs doing, but I don't know how to do it.
okay, I think we can all agree product quality is essential. I think we move on. Have another question? Right. Yes, Mark.
Unfortunately, this isn't a question. We've lost a lot of capability for the science for measuring those things you've just talked about. 30 years ago, there was a meat research institute. 20 years ago, it had become the Food Research Institute, and I don't think it exists anymore. We've got a little bit, there's been fewer and fewer scientists working in this space. We've actually got the capability of measuring some of those things because we've got a CT scanner, which some breeds are doing, and they're getting measures of intramuscular fat just based on muscle density. And we've also got what's called a food sensory lab that SASUC in Scotland have, where they can do taste panel things. The sticking point is exactly what Tim said, who pays for it, because they aren't cheap things to use.
Right. Should say that in terms of implementing radical change, going way back in our own sheep flock, that was bringing in bare-coated rams from Newton Stewart instead of the Perth type and the blackface, and that was back at the time. It was kind of immediate post-war, and change of breed and change of farming system and so on. Yep.
Thank you. Question sort of really for Tim, I suppose, and it's probably a bit breed specific, but in a way it's not. So you're breeding the X-Liner, and you developed that. We know that, and that's a really positive story. I've read quite a bit. I'm not as well informed as some people about epigenetics and that role that plays in sheep flocks, and I think it's undervalued then as something that we need to look at. So then, if we understand epigenetics and the gains we can get from our own animals, how transferable are, for instance, your genetics or any of the guys up there in this shed up here? They're all selling something slightly different, probably with the same aim, or they say it's the same aim, and we might argue about that or not. But so how transferable, if I come and buy a tuck from you or anybody else, do I lose the epigenetic gain by all the work you're doing with looking at EBVs and worm counts and worm tolerance and all that kind of stuff is really positive? Does that get diluted when those genetics get taken somewhere else?
So I guess the question is about environmental influence on genetics, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I'm out of my depth. but the theory is, I guess, that I'm selling you that ram, and I'm selling you the semen in him so I'm selling you half of the genetics. So it's fully transferable, but there is always an environmental impact on that, isn't there? So if I sell you, so here's a good way of looking at it maybe. If I've got my rams at home and I test my flock really well, and they're on thick clover lays from the day they're born to the day they're finished, and then I send them to you, and you're at 2,500 foot somewhere else with scraggy marshy grass or whatever, then those traits aren't going to show through as well, are they, as if I rear them in worse conditions than you. So yes, you've got to be sensible, haven't you, when you buy? There's no, yeah, you've got to know where they come from as well, I guess yes. And I don't know, I don't understand the influence of the argument of influence of environment on genetics, how it changes genetics.
So I suppose epigenetics is the idea that changes that happen in one generation is transferred to the second, so environmental challenges is transferred through the genetic material. But I suppose the principle is the same, which is it's the question is not only just is that animal recorded and is it performance recorded, but also what system it was being reared on, and how similar is it in terms of your system and in terms of your breeding values. So it's a more complex question than just going it's top 1%. It's also understanding how that was selected. That from an EBV perspective, the technique they're using is trying to remove all of the environmental effect you would hope, but the epigenetics does confuse it slightly.
Okay.
But it's still understanding what the breeder's aims are and does it fit with yours.
Very good. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I'm admiring the plant pots around here
Bit
today.
closer.
Well,
Closer.
I'm surrounded by and impressed by the plant pots.
Are we gone to
good.
Gardener's World?
Pardon? And I admire the ambitions of the wool board doing things, innovative things like that. Is wool the main problem in sheep farming and the main cost in sheep farming?
Right. Yes, Liz.
Wool. So is wool the main problem? No. Wool is part. We have to recognise its heritage and its importance in the sheep sector. Our challenge now is wool compromising some of our systems because of the time and inputs required to manage it. But wool itself isn't the problem. It's how we are choosing to run those sheep, perhaps, or there's other options. So what's important now is people. It's shifting people's view to away from they are wool producers to mainly meat producers, and if they want to continue to have woolly sheep, crack the hell on, but they've still got to be efficient. They can be very efficient woolly sheep and there can be very inefficient non-wool sheep, but it's still about making a clear understanding of what you want to achieve from your business. And there's innovation and there's people who are innovating themselves in terms of what wool can do, but it might not be for everybody, and there's certainly been an increase in the amount of shedding sheep out there and the genetics coming through for that.
I went to a sheep farm the other day up on the Mendips. Andy Weir, I don't know if he's here, Jen Weir, that I saw him wandering around earlier. These guys make 40% of their income from wool. All right, so you can do stuff with wool. They do everything the wool board say they shouldn't. So they have coloured fleeces, and they hand clip them themselves. But they put an awful lot of time into marketing it and making something out of it and taking it through and selling it at the value it should be sold at. But if you want to do that, you've got to be a marketer, and that's. But I think that's the same for all farmers. I think all farmers need to be marketers, and they don't necessarily have to be on that scale, but they have to. It is your job as a farmer to market farming and your product to the public. Every time you see somebody walking across your land, instead of saying "get off of my land" and walloping them, you need to say "good afternoon, how are you getting on? Do you want to buy a burger?" You just got to change your attitude, and you'll get and we will increase their appreciation of what we do, and I think that is a good
Peter,
opportunity.
Comment on wool, Peter?
Yeah, and I know in North Wales there's there's a few farmers just imported merino semen in to try and improve the fleeces, and there's work ongoing in North Wales on improving the wool like that. So I don't know, it's a long road, I think.
Right. Okay, next question.
Liz, you talked about sort of that curve of denial and then right down to, unfortunately, depression, where you're not able to get out of, to the farmers that are maybe looking to retire or, sort of almost had their sheep career.
Yeah.
Do you think there will be a lot that won't experiment and will just go out of sheep farming? There'll be fewer farmers doing a lot more sheep in the UK?
And certainly that's one of the theories is that people will leave the industry. The sheep numbers might not decline, but people will leave. But I think we underestimate the stoicism of sheep farmers. They will maintain with minimal income, and because they recognise themselves as sheep farmers. So part of it is it's that sort of the emotional intelligence bit we haven't really focused on. Technically, we can get people out of businesses and we can make it really hard. So we can, in my harsher days, I go, yeah, people just need to leave and give opportunities to others, but we have to recognise that is a family unit that is leaving. So the emotional intelligence of how we do things, we aren't very good at all. But to actually answer your question, I think it's that we risk ageism. And what's interesting about some of our regenerative approaches that me and others in the room are obsessed with is that actually a lot of that generation has a lot of knowledge that we need to use. So it's actually, we can really enthuse them in what people are really interested in because they recognise it from how they used to farm. So I think there's a lot of knowledge in that generation that we can't afford to lose.
To continue the point, do you think that there will possibly be, 2 decades ago there was a massive overhaul in the pig industry,
yeah,
with a lot of small producers going out and big producers coming in and staying in, and do you think the sheep industry will see anything such as bed and breakfast sheep opportunities where maybe you don't own the sheep but you are paid a weekly sum per head at all?
And we see it in the cattle world. Do you mean there's an increase in cattle grazing, sort of contract cattle grazing, and that's partly because of the capital cost of buying those cattle in. So it's an interesting way of getting into cattle. But Jean and Tim alluded to it. But yeah, there is hundreds of thousands of hectares that need animals in bits of the country that their animals aren't there at the moment. So there are huge opportunities for getting stock. But as Tim said, it's labour. It's getting people there, and it's also having the right type of sheep that are reduced intervention type sheep. That's not saying that nobody has to look at them, but they're not hard sheep to look after.
Right. I'm going to take Chairman's prerogative and make a comment. Microphone there. There's a retired dentist about 20 miles away from us who, in his 80s, changed his genetics, and he said it saved his life and it saved his enterprise by taking so much trouble out of it. And I'll not name the breeds that he was working with previously, but easy care did the job.
Genetics, not his genetics
Yes.
and new family. That's my
Absolutely.
face was like.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yes.
Does the panel think, as a country, we have too many breeds of sheep, for insofar as we've got a very yeah, sorry. We have massive numbers of breeds of sheep, but we're all trying to produce the same thing. So perhaps we ought to concentrate on fewer breeds and do a bit more research into the genetics, etc., of those breeds.
Well, the answer is obviously yes, and you all ought to buy them off me. But no. So there's two things, aren't there? So there's one is we're trying to get something that tastes fairly uniform, that we can make that people can buy over and over again and get repeatability, and that would be in favour of having one breed. But the other thing is that if we market our stuff right, we take advantage of the fact that we have so many different breeds with so many different aspects. And it's a way for the smaller farmer to be able to take control of his marketing, because he's producing something that's local and tells a story and so on. So, I mean, the answer is you're never going to get everybody to agree on what you're going to keep. So it doesn't. But I think the diversity is something to champion, really.
And I agree with Tim, which is the idea that I haven't got enough. There's not enough hours in the day to fight those debates about which sheep is the one we keep. For me, it's about back to the point of being really clear in terms of what I want to achieve in my system. I don't therefore really care what the sheep breed is. Does it do what it needs to do in my system? And I'm probably becoming more individualistic in terms of encouraging a farmer to be inherently selfish and go, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And so if we try and solve the industry, we're always going to be disappointed, but we can solve it farm by farm by making sure it's the right thing for that farm. So the range of sheep is a strength, but let's not pretend that all of those sheep will do the job for everybody.
Peter?
Yeah, I think I agree with Tim as well. What he said, like Welsh mountain sheep, well, up the mountains, you've got to have them anyway. There's, different parts of the country, different breeds. They've evolved to that system. Cumbrians, they've got the ones with the horns up the fells there. They're much fancier, but there's all. They've got a story to say in Cumbria when they're selling I can't remember the name of the breed now. Herdwicks, yeah. So I think every part of the country would be ashamed to lose a lot of them.
All right, do I have another question in the audience?
I'll finish with one if I may.
Wait for the mic.
Get it right this time. Right. I read recently, if I'm correct, that we are to be applauded as an industry because we are now getting 58% of our lambs on spec, and it's gone up to 58% from about 54. Isn't that a shocking indictment of the industry in general, that we can only get 58% of our lambs on spec?
The bit that interests me more is what proportion of those lambs are making money. So that's the bit. So we can chase spec and we can get some E2s or E3s. It's not telling me anything about whether that system's profitable. So we could get animals those lambs are out of spec and are not hitting what that market wants, but it's actually a more profitable system. I'm not advocating as that the aim, but for me, confirmation and questions about that is interesting, but the profitability of that system is more interesting. And so for me, the question back, which is what proportion of sheep farmers know their cost of production, is something we have to challenge ourselves to as well.
And also that quote of being in spec, that is in supermarket spec. But a lot of those little lambs then go off to another market, so they're being exported or used for another market. And some of the bigger and overweight lambs, of course, are perfect spec for the butchers. So although I know what you're saying and agree with you, there's still a market and we still get paid quite well for everything that is out of spec, don't we? I suspect that if we were paid reasonably well for everything in spec and really ditched for everything else, then we would very quickly change what we do.
Yes.
I think you've implied it, Liz, and I think Tim might have in some comments too. You're not talking about lowering your input costs explicitly. You talked about whether they were profitable,
Yeah.
and you've talked about sheep that do the job right. So have we got systems that are too high input here?
Well, as alluded to, we have a massive range of systems in this country. We have some highly profitable systems that are based around grass and with minimal inputs cost, and they're driving input costs further down. So I think we do need to, it's what's motivated behaviour change in fertiliser use quite dramatically in the last year is when prices went as high as they did. People have changed their businesses. We just need to know where the pain point is. And for until the dry came, that pain point was a lot of concentrate. So people were not paying money for concentrate. So what we need is for not the economics to drive it, but the person to make a decision about what their system needs to look like in the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay. Right. Have we? Yes.
Iceberg diseases, and more people are keeping close flocks. Where's the North Country mule going to be in 20 years' time?
Somewhere in Swaledale?
Well.
But I think I'm taking this again. Anyway, so the mule. So from a mule perspective, we have a lot of sheep don't know their iceberg status. The challenge we have with a mule is there's a lot of them, so there's more likely to be disease, or we're finding disease more in them. My concern is that all breed societies and breed companies need to start doing a lot more screening than they currently are. So we can have a go at mules, and mules I'm doubting they'll still exist, but our challenge is how we encourage all sheep farmers to actually be responsible about whether they're bringing disease into their farm or whether they've already got disease on their farm. Well, I can't hear.
The mule market isn't going to be there because people are going to be keeping breeding replacements themselves, aren't they? It's happening more and more.
Oh no, from a stratification perspective, they are reducing definitely, but they'll be there, but there'll be other lowland. So Exline is an example of other lowland crossing type that are going to be replacing some of them. And what's interesting is when you do comparison, mules are a bloody good sheep and can produce a lot of lamb at heavy weight, but there is an input cost associated with that.
What are those farmers going to do? What are they going to sell if they can't sell mules? So it's an odd thing, isn't it? When you look at it 2030, somebody now who's selling North Country mules there, and he's got a child this high. What's that child going to be selling? It's a very strange thing, isn't it?
And part of that is about the mule is an example of, but where does the innovation come? People will still be wanting to buy decent mules that have good health status with some known genetics going into that system. If people are willing to run those systems, people will buy them because that's the product that people are associated with. But at the moment, in a lot of them, we have no genetic knowledge on them and we have no health knowledge on them. Focus on those two things. Whoever's kids are in the mule world will continue to sell mules if they get the house in order.
Right.
And that is the same from other breeds too.
I think we'll draw this session to a conclusion. Before I ask you to thank our speakers, I would just like to summarise by saying that we all have decisions that we can take in relation to our own enterprises and our sheep. You've heard it, some of these talked about this afternoon. I think it's important that we can each sort of analyse our own situation and take appropriate action ourselves. And there are advisors like Liz and suppliers of genetics like Tim and many other breeds and breeders available, but we have to know how to ask the right questions and come to the most appropriate conclusions. So thank you very much for your attention, and happy sheep farming.